Strangler
Nice. How was it?
on Hulu.
It was good. I liked it.
I really liked it. It was obviously we all have interest in it because it's a local story for us, and I had no idea the movie was being made. Keira Knightley's, she's really good in it, and it's a really different, I think, kind of a different role for her. But I thought she was really good.
Nice. I haven't seen her in anything in a while.
Yeah, but definitely just had that historical biopic.
Seemed to be very accurate too, from what we were checking.
Well, it was interesting that it said inspired by a true story, and there's all kinds of different definitions when it says inspired by versus based on and stuff. So it seemed to, when we started looking up stuff as we were watching it, adhered to it, but maybe, I'm sure parts of it.
It definitely implied something a little bit different than what most people conclude the case, like how they solved it, but I thought it was a good take on it.
Really? I don't know much about the Boston Strangler. Like, I know the name, obviously, but I don't really remember.
I remember that whatever the big trial or whatever it was around 1969, but like this, the movie started, like the murder started back in like 1962 or something like that. So it was like, it spanned a lot more time and started a lot earlier than I don't know a ton about it, but.
How many victims were there?
It was like
12, yeah, it was 12 or 13.
Wow. And it went on that long, huh?
Yeah, it was crazy. But anyway, definitely worth a watch, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about Lockwood Co, the new, relatively new, came out late January. Netflix sort of supernatural adventure action show. I've been anticipating this one. I think Jen has too for a long time. I discovered the book series Lockwood Co about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's like, I love it. It's up there for me with like the kind of sort of post-millennium classics of YA, like Potter or Hunger Games. To me, it's right up there with those as far as just how great I think the book series is. So was hotly anticipating this show coming out.
Well, you guys have read the book, so we should start with you.
So the principal characters are Lucy Carlisle, Anthony Lockwood, and George Karim. They're these three kids that work for Lockwood's ghost hunting agency. We're in an alternative London in which there's been this just sort of massive outbreak of ghosts coming back and troubling people, and it's become sort of like an epidemic that's been plaguing this version of London for the last 50-ish years. And so kids can see ghosts. So kids have been enlisted in these what they call psychical investigation agencies to be able to sort of combat ghosts. They find the source of the ghost, they fight it off with swords and all kinds of various weaponry and stuff like that, and then trap the ghosts, and then that's how things get put right, and then they move on to the next. So there's a whole array of these competing agencies around London. There's 2 big agencies and then other competing ones, and they're just a small sort of upstart that doesn't have any adult supervision, and it's just sort of how they get wrapped up. And there's obviously the implication of this bigger kind of, not conspiracy if you will, but just some sort of bigger weighty reason for why this is all happening.
I also read the book series. It was a page turner. I finished them in no time. The plot was amazing. The characters were dynamic. It was humorous and light, and then a little scary and intense at times. It was fantastically written. Very, very big fan of it, and also anticipated the show starting. Could not wait for Lockwood Co to come out, to be honest. And I think that, again, like Ron said, one of the better adaptations from a series to TV. Fantastic. Everything was pretty much what I expected and how I pictured it.
Yeah, I'd say overall, like, right off the bat, a tremendous adaptation of a book series. We've seen tons of them. Some of them are done pretty well. Some of them are okay. This is definitely one of the better ones I've ever seen. Are there some changes from the books? Yes. I think it's really a great, well, at least for me as kind of an aspiring author, etc., a great study in the choices that are made from coming from the page where you have all that space and time in the narrative to making something work in a narrative format of a TV show. And, what do you do to condense things and like add tension and make things kind of just sort of unfold in a, for lack of a better way to say it, in a quicker time format, being in this case 8-episode television series that covers the first 2 books in the series. So I thought just overall great. Love the principal cast. Love a lot of interesting people were changed, are a little bit different than they were in the books, but I think in some great ways. We'll talk about it, like Pamela Joplin for one. I thought just the fact that it's a guy, I can't even remember the guy's name in the book, in the series it's a woman, and I just think that was a very interesting choice that made that character much more impactful and not just kind of a standalone villain. That's just one example of a character. But Cam, what's your reaction to just seeing the show?
I loved it, and I think the fact that it is not only a book adaptation but a very good book adaptation worked in its favor in a lot of ways. It didn't have a lot of the pitfalls of original YA or teenage kind of series where it's like super expository and there's a lot of like obvious dialogue, and maybe it's like hammy or kind of over the top. This one just felt a little bit different and more natural, and more care was put into it. So overall I loved it, but I feel like at the same time there were definitely times where I could see where it was being adapted, because like some of the dialogue you could tell was lifted straight from the novels, but then I almost felt that I could pick out which dialogue was added for the show because it was a little bit like snappier and a little bit less prosy dialogue, whereas there was some stuff that I could tell was maybe a little bit like verbose, I guess. I also found myself, I rewatched it, a few of the episodes. I rewatched the entire series twice, but I rewatched some of the episodes like 3 times because I kept finding myself like there's so much new lore and information, especially when they get to the second section, which is based off, I guess, the second book. Like I had to watch that intro to that, I think it was probably the 4th episode, a whole bunch of times just to get like, okay, why are they going to the graveyard, and what is this other group of ghost hunters, and how are they different from what Lockwood Co does? And then the big thing for me was I would have liked to see a little bit more of the world around them, because it presents itself as if it's like a normal world just with ghosts. But then there's one point where they say, oh, you got to watch out for the relic hunters because they'll kill you. And I'm like, there seems to be some element of like dystopianness to the because like obviously the kids are being put in these deathly situations, but then there's also these murderous relic people that run around. So there was I wanted to watch each episode a bunch of times just so I could make sure I was getting all of that information, because a lot of it was through dialogue, which sometimes I can be distracted by the visuals or something and not even register what someone is saying, so I had to watch it a couple times. But in that way, I just think because the dialogue was so good and it did a great job world building and everything, it was fun to watch over and over again. And I love the characters and the actors portraying them, and the plots of the 2 adaptions were really interesting. So I might have to go back and read those books at some point.
I would recommend it. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
I agree, Cam, with some of that. I also noted too, which I'm sure Ron will agree, that after reading the books, they seemed a little lighter and a little more YA, and the series presented itself to be much more mature, a little scarier, a little more intense. One notable difference was the Skull in the books was humorous. He was snarky. He was condescending but quirky and funny, and they had a lot of dialogue between him and Lucy that was, kind of off the cuff and funny. And then he was pretty evil.
Yeah, well, I think going back and reading the books, I think he was a little more evil at the beginning, and I think I had the same reaction as you, but I think I was remembering some of the later books. But yeah, that's a difference. And yes, there's a few just sort of nods to the presentation of these adolescents. They have a couple of drinks and a couple of beers. There's obviously swearing.
Yeah,
and there
the
was
language
nothing,
is
not
beefed up a little bit.
Language is beefed up in the books, but I thought it was good. It was not over the top. I think it will make it more relatable. It makes it more relatable as a TV show. Yeah, the cast was excellent. The principals, especially Ruby Stokes, who, I don't know, did you watch Bridgerton? Jen, obviously that's not my kind of show, but I guess she came from that. Cameron Chapman, I guess, is totally new, and Ali Haji Heshmati, I think he may have done some stuff before, but principal cast was great. There's a couple of people in this that I've seen in other places. Ben Crompton, who plays Julius Winkman, who was very great and very evil. He's somebody from Game of Thrones. I can't remember who, but he was definitely somebody in Game of Thrones.
He's very familiar. We've definitely seen him in some other projects.
The guy who plays Quill Kipps, I've seen him.
His character was fantastic too. The bravado and the sensitive side, and then seeing him being
I liked
vulnerable.
his redemption.
Yeah, it was great.
And he gets played more in the books as kind of a little bit more of a stiff stickler kind of guy, and just the fact that they had a moment where he actually almost displays a little bit of interest in Lucy Carlisle.
Yeah, I love
her
that
out on
scene.
a date.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that wasn't in the books. Kim, you talked about the world building. One of the things I think that was highlighted at various times, didn't pick up on as easily in the books. I remember one of the first things, Jen, you and I talked about when we were both reading the books was, when does this take place? When does this take place? Because it feel of being contemporary but not contemporary.
Right, yeah.
Definitely technology that they have and they don't have. There's no cell phones. There wasn't a lot of visible computer or internet, although they did refer to technology. It definitely seems like in the show that they very much established that it is taking place, relatively contemporarily. They looked at sort of different institutions and different things happening in the 80s and the 70s, where that was a lot more obscure in the book. And I guess the idea is that because they've been plagued by this sort of ghost infestation, that it's affected how things have developed economically and technologically, and so some things are up to date, comparable to where we are, and some things are very, very much behind. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing that they portray visually in the show.
There was something in the intro that showed a pile of computers, basically they were throwing them away. So I think that was your nod to thinking that they didn't really develop technology because of the problem, as they call it.
Yeah, like I said, I thought the world building was very good overall, although I just felt like there was so much, especially in the second half of the show, where there are all these different teams and they're competing, and then there's the whole process of research and figuring out the haunting and everything else. So I had to kind of stop and go back and make sure I was picking up everything.
And there's definitely an element of danger. Ghosts can hurt you. They can actually kill you. And if you are ghost touched, you go into a coma-like state and you can't be reached. I think that was actually in the show was very powerful scene when they had, I think it was Lucy stumbled into the hospital room and she opened the door and it was
that was freaky.
100 ghost touched agents that were just locked and with that milky eye stare. I thought that was one of the creepiest things I saw in the show. That was very well done, and it was a little terrifying.
Yeah, it was interesting on how some elements of the book, about being ghost locked or whatever, they kind of really expanded upon in the show. Looking at some structural things I found interesting in comparing the show to the books. So the opening of the book and the show starts out with you jump right into this, not jump right into this, but it starts off with kind of an action scene, kind of Lucy and Lockwood in kind of character and doing their thing, and then it flashes back to how Lucy got here. And that's identical to the way the book handles the opening of the story. But I thought what was really interesting was the choices they made in Lucy's flashback to her life before coming to London. In the book series, it focused mostly on her and her family, and she had sisters, a bunch of sisters, and her relationship with her dad, and just how she developed her talent and went to work for, I can't remember the name of the agency in her hometown that she worked for. So that sort of plot arc followed the same way it did in the books, but it was interesting. In the show, they didn't make any mention of her having any siblings, and almost portrayed her as an only child, but did focus on her friends that she made at the agency when she first started working, and her one friend, Nori, in particular. And that was a brand new character that was introduced on the show, and giving her more of kind of a motivation for what she did and why she did it, why she came to London, why she was so motivated to run away and start a new life, etc. I thought that was a really good example of something that was added in the show that wasn't in the books, that then propels her throughout her adventures.
Well, you mentioned earlier that one of the characters is the older research woman there. I forget her name. Was that a new character or a change from the books?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the name's still Joplin, but it was a guy in the books, and it was just this older, crusty researcher guy who ends up getting, compromised and becomes, and gets taken over and becomes villainous. And I just think this emphasized the relationship between her and George and how it kind of came together, and almost how really get into how she manipulated George in a really different way. It wasn't handled the same way in the book, and I thought that was just really interesting how they changed that up.
I think changing the gender of the character, it really showed an infatuation that George had with her, and that made the storyline a little more believable, that he really got swept up in the research and everything, that he kind of looked up to her, maybe had a little bit of a crush on her. And
they had a couple of kind of almost romantic scenes, and I was like, are they doing that on purpose? And I was kind of weirded out. And then once it all unfolded, I was like, that was very good, because he had that other kind of fling with the relic hunter there. So that was all interesting. I think George was I like the balance of, you have Lockwood and Lucy, who are kind of your typical YA beautiful protagonists in love, and then I really liked how different George was, just even the character's mannerisms, he was very hunched over and whirly almost, and he just felt he was a good physical actor and just brought a real good personality to that character. I really liked it.
Yeah, I think George is definitely a little bit different than he was in the book, but I think they brought a lot to his character and brought a quirkiness to him that wasn't just about him being crusty or dumpy or whatever else like that. It was more about his personality and his quirks and his sensitivity, and feeling kind of left out of the group at times.
I actually thought he might become a villain at some point because of how antagonistic he was initially, but obviously I don't think that's going to happen now that they've kind of reconciled, but I wasn't sure where that was going.
One of the things I think they've touched on is, so Lockwood has a little bit of an ego, and that comes through in the books. But I think they played on that, the pitfalls of his ego and him. He never has an ego in sort of a not super overly narcissistic way, but it just his ego does get him in trouble, and they kind of amplify that, and how he makes some particular sort of mishaps and mistakes because of his desire to want to be the biggest and best firm and among the ghost hunting firms, etc. So I thought that was really interesting. Another thing, Jen, I'm curious what you think is, to me, the romantic element between Lucy and Lockwood, I don't want to say was almost non-existent in the story, but it was very, very subtextual and very slow burn, and very even at the conclusion of the book series, it's only just kind of starting to kind of break the surface a little bit, and they didn't push this to CW levels where it's big massive makeout scenes and everything else. It's still very much a slow burn relationship, but they did up it in an interesting way, but it's still not one of the predominant elements of the show. And the fact that they didn't sort of just lean into making that making the potential relationship between those two the focal point of the show.
I agree. I think that when Lockwood was a little jealous when Kipps had asked Lucy to go for coffee when he found out, and he had said, I saw you talking to him, and it was definitely a little bit of jealousy there. I think that has to do with how they really matured from the book series into the television show. I think that they really adapted that for a little bit of an older audience. And I thought it was very well done. You're right. It was subtle. It wasn't over the top, but it definitely elevated that romantic kind of relationship between the two of them. I liked it. I thought they did a great job with it.
Now, I know you're familiar with Joe Cornish, and I know Attack the Block and a couple of other things he's done. So I think he was a great choice for this. What's your thoughts on just the overall production and special effects?
Oh yeah, I was overall very impressed with. A lot of these Netflix or streaming shows in general can be kind of hit or miss, but this had a lot of really great cinematography, and the effects were serviceable for the most part. They're not really going for a super realistic look with the ghosts. Obviously they're not cartoons, but they're a little bit more like Ghostbusters, where they're kind of wispy physical entities as opposed to invisible, totally invisible, or apparition. I guess they are technically apparitions, but they're a little bit more fantastic. So the way they did that was really cool. I'm trying to think. I really like the music. You had mentioned that you didn't like some of the music choices they made for some battles, which were a little bit more, some of the fight scenes had like fun, like upbeat rock music, almost like a Scooby-Doo chase scene kind of thing. I like that, but you said you weren't a big fan of it.
I would say initially it struck me, I love the soundtrack, basically a lot of like 80s new wave kind of music, and so I think it fit the mood of the show very well. There were times like during fight scenes and stuff like that where I expected a more kind of dramatic orchestral like tense type of music might take over, and it seemed a little jarring to just have the Cure playing in the background of a sword fight. But it grew on me. I mean, I definitely love the soundtrack, but yeah, there were some moments where I was like, that's an interesting choice of music for what's going on the screen.
Yeah, I really can't say that there's anything I really disliked about it, to be honest. I loved it. Is there anything that you guys didn't like, or changes from the book that you didn't like, or?
No, overall, I thought they just did a tremendous job. And usually, when talking about Star Wars, Marvel stuff, there's lots of nitpicks. This was one that I thought just really nailed it. Overall,
I have to agree.
Of a show, and just being, a supernatural. One of the things I would say, I mean, there's so many of these kind of supernatural YA type shows, and what I would say as a compliment to this show is that it doesn't lean into that sort of CW-ish kind of thing. It has a quality to it that I think rises above the typical teen show that you'll see on cable
and on a lot of streaming channels.
A lot of streaming channels as well. Yeah.
It ends on kind of a cliffhanger. I really hope that we can get some resolution to that. Have we heard anything about season 2? Or
I think that's part of the reason why I definitely wanted to do a whole episode on this show, is because I'm telling everyone I can about the show, and I so want a season 2. I want a season, however many seasons they need to adapt the whole book series. But
it was that good. I mean, honestly, even just waiting for this one to come out for season 1, it was like waiting for Christmas morning. For us that read the books, we couldn't wait to see what they were going to do, and they delivered. They did a fantastic job.
It seems like most of the time when Netflix cancels a new show like that, it's like a week after it comes out. Like that's what it seems like. Archive 81, Cowboy Bebop, all of those were canceled like almost immediately after they had been released, whereas the shows that do get renewed, I think you go a little bit longer without hearing anything. So I think that's a good sign that we haven't heard any cancellation news yet.
No, and it definitely, I mean, it was doing great numbers. It did initially really, really good in the States too. But then internationally, I know it remained number 1 for quite a bit of time. And, I've certainly watched it. I've watched it 3 times all the way through. I'll probably watch it again sometime soon. So hopefully, I mean, but it almost feels like a show has to like hit like Stranger Things level, or even like Wednesday, which also was very good, by the way. I don't know that we'll do a whole episode on that, but Wednesday with Jenna Ortega was definitely a very good show. But it almost has to hit with that kind of impact to get renewed by Netflix these days. But this seems to have done very, very well, so just really hoping that it gets renewed. And
if you haven't seen it,
absolutely.
Tune in, watch it.
If you like, if you read YA or your kids read YA, absolutely get them this book series. It's to me, like I said, it's up there with some of the iconic YA series of the last 25 years, and it was just a really great adaptation.
And as someone who hasn't read the book, which I'm sure a lot of people going into this haven't read the book, I think it was great for newcomers too. I mean, it feels like you're thrown in a little bit, and there's not, like I'm sure with the books you have time to go off on asides to explain certain things, so it might feel like there's a lot being thrown at you, but I still think it's a good, it's not too much or it's not going to totally go over your head if you haven't read the book. So I think it was very successful in that way as well.
Definitely. If you haven't read the books, don't shy away from watching the show. You can read the books later.
Yeah, and there'll be surprises and Easter eggs for you in the books if you do the show first, and vice versa. So all in all, 2, 4, 6 very enthusiastic thumbs up for Lockwood Co. And so that's probably about a wrap for this episode, and we will be back again. I don't know what's next on the docket.
I guess Guardians
Guardians of
is
the
coming
Galaxy,
up.
unless something else comes up. I know we do
Or
want to
Dungeons
see
and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah,
is
that looks
coming.
good.
That looks good. I'm hearing good things about that. So we'll see what will be on the docket for us in the next few weeks or so. But thanks for listening, and hit those likes and subscribes and make any comments that you can make. That's always helpful for us as we work our way through these episodes. And we'll see you the next time around.
See you on the next one, guys.